Welcome to our dissertation of post and beam framing, a wealth of wood. And we're happy to be joined by seven of the most prominent and first generation homes in the Salem County area. Newcomers to America must have been astounded by the magnificent forest that crowded the settlements. Back in overpopulated, land-stripped Europe, the countryside had long since contributed the last of her virgin trees. In some countries, it was a hanging offense to level any remaining trees without permission. But in the colonies, virgin timber grew in great quantities. These giants reached the heights that the lower branches received little of the light that filtered down from the canopy of leaves. Losing out, branches fell off the trunk before they were fully developed. The result was a tall, straight, limb-free, and therefore not free, which is a very important, trunk that reached for the sun. The most spectacular tree was the white pine in our area here. The timber soared to 150 feet and on up over 200 feet on occasion. Although a softer wood, the heartwood of these ancient pines was far more hard and dense than their smaller relatives of today. The English Navy claimed that any white pine 2 feet or more in diameter was for mast stock and had the trunk blazed with the king's arrow. The colonists, well on their way to becoming independent spirits in the new land, were not particularly troubled by using some of these huge timbers for their everyday needs and purposes. At any rate, wood in such plentiful condition was the favorite building material in America. There are other alternatives in the new land. It was also rich with stone and clay for bricks, particularly around this Alloway area. In all, the colonies, such masonry trade strong, created durable foundations and chimneys. The structure. Beneath the clapboard and shingle skin of every wooden homestead was a rugged wooden skeleton. Great square timbers made up the perpendicular posts and horizontal beams. They were forever joined by wooden tree nails or trunnels. These most commonly we would know as wooden pegs. Some of these framing members ran as large as 10 inches by 10 inches on cross section, somewhat of overkill for a house structure, but nevertheless these were meant to be here 300 years later. To keep the posts square with the beams, braces were locked to slant between them. Every corner had 2 diagonal braces locking them. No doubt about it, the colonial homestead was built to endure the ages. The builder's choice for timber framing was certainly the great white oak. The majority of the early American colonies were English, and they were all very well acquainted with its badly depleted relative, the English or Norman oak. They found the native oak all that they could wish, for it was very workable, strong, hard, and heavy, and held enough tannic acid in its fibers to discourage any number of fungi and insect infestations. The tree was found in plenty, particularly in this area, southern New Jersey, Delaware. Throughout the eastern part of the colonies also. Some additional eastern trees found their way into timber framing. Red oak also works rather well. It's lighter than white oak, hard to season, but does not resist decay because it has very low tannin content, unfortunately. Chestnut works nicely, fairly soft, light, straight-grained, resists moisture, and fine for damp spots such as sills, but now lost completely to the Asian chestnut blight, which actually started in the 1920s. White oak, easily worked, hard, strong, heavy, resist decay. Red maple, hard, heavy, strong. Hard to work though, very cranky, and twists on drying. Hemlock works well, but it's very brittle, splinters much, and is quite knotty. White pine works well, seasons nicely, it's light, knotty. From round logs to square is very easy, from one hewner. There was never time to retire the felling axe. Its one last contribution to the homestead framework was the scoring cuts to be made on the outside of chalk lines. The axeman stood on the log as he did when bucking, used the same swing and angle cut to bite through the wood fibers. No chips were removed, only a series of deep inch slashes were made. Then the broadaxe was brought out and would slice off the unwanted chunks between the scoring cuts. Chances are that more must be removed before hewing to the chalk line. Once again, the axe cut into the partially flattened sides, perhaps 2 to 4 cuts every 6 inches or so. That would penetrate to the chalk line and the excess wood beyond it. Those final score marks, made centuries earlier, are obvious today. In America's enduring colonial buildings, such as the buildings that are represented to us today in the room by these homeowners, these restorers. Once 2 parallel faces were hewn, the timber was rolled until it rested on one side or one of them. No need for a timber dog here. The work would stay put when resting on the flat surface. 2 parallel chalk lines were again snapped, the distance between them being the same distance between the 2 finished sides. Once again, the felling axe scored the unwanted wood, and again, the broadaxe sliced off the chunks between the scored marks. The now squared post, or beam, as we put it, was rough hewn into shape, and that was good enough unless the timber would be exposed in the interior of the homestead. Perhaps, too, there were a few humps left from the hewing that went skinning. Then it was a job for the adze, another tool that resembles the axe, but was really a long-handled chisel that could smooth any wooden face. In the hands of a skilled craftsman, quite to perfection. The timber carrier, how were these hewn logs moved? Now that the logs have been square hewn, freed of unwanted wood, and perhaps tidied up with the adze, there was the matter of hauling their considerable numbers off to the building site. So all this was done at the mill. The scattering of chips and trim branches that lay on the forest floor would disintegrate and disappear, replaced by new seedlings or saplings the next coming spring. The common skidding sleds or the 2-wheeled cart just wouldn't do. The fresh timbers were smooth and clean, and no one right-thinking colonial carpenter would employ his mortise and tenon tools on wood encrusted with mud or sand. The log draggers were careful for moving logs only for these short distances. The snow blankets that at the right time of year covered the more northerly colonies made the logging sled quite a natural. Even in the warm months or in the snow-free southern areas, the wooden runners of the sled slid reasonably well over the forest floor. These were for short hauls between the felling site and the skidway, the nearby collection yard. The forward end of each unworked log was chained to the crosspiece spanning the runners. The back ends were dragged behind, and that just wouldn't do for any freshly square-hewn timber. Any ground in mud, sand, or like debris would not be looked on kindly when the mortise and tenon began to be applied by the joiners. Here was the answer to the problem. It made sense to combine the Go Devil and the yarding sled into a 2-purpose sled. A small version, about 4 feet in width, could be snaked around the trees with a pair of horse or oxen. The low rig made for easy loading of the hewn timber from its log supports. And once on the 2-sled, the future post and beams never touched the ground. Wheeled carts and wagons, and this is as pertaining to the movement of these just freshly hewn beams. Like the Go Devil and the yard sleds, the log cart was useful for dragging raw logs, not clean, not cleaned, but freshly hewn timber from the forest. They saw service in the free South or wherever the land surface was firm and level or gently rolling. Any abrupt decline made holding a load back a difficult chore and might need a runaway cart.